So, again, welcome. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I am really excited because I've been wanting to do this for so long. And what this is to really share the teachings of yoga as I understand them and how they have become or are the underpinnings of everything that we do in Kali Ki, Reiki, and Wisdom School. Some of you have heard me say 100 times, in Kali Ki, there are two wings. One is the wing of healing, and the other is the wing of meditation. And if we practice these two wings faithfully, then we can soar. And so I want to talk a little bit tonight about how yoga actually is so much about healing, although it's not mentioned a huge amount in its sutras and studies and things like that. It totally represents healing because healing is wholeness. And yoga is all about coming into our wholeness, our fullness, understanding our true nature. And so, of course, when I say yoga, I'll go into it a little bit more later. I'm not just talking about hatha yoga, the yoga of postures and positions. That's one of the 8 limbs, one of the 8 branches of yoga, which we will talk about, and you'll see, I hope we'll get to, and you'll see in your handout. Also, I got to tell you, I haven't been this nervous about teaching in a really, really long time, partly because I'm teaching out of notes tonight, and I haven't taught out of notes in forever. And that's because yoga is so vast. It is just vast beyond vast. And to try to consolidate it, congeal it, is it's impossible, literally impossible for any one person. I'm certainly not a scholar of yoga, so I'm just someone who's been studying it for a lot of years. If any of you are scholars, I'm sure you'll find things that I say that you can totally disagree with, and that's fine, because that's what yogis often do, because there's so many different schools, so many different traditions, so many lineages in this basically 5,000-year-old tradition. But I am going to try to make some coherent sense out of it, and at the same time, I really want to avoid being overly intellectual. You'll see in the handout I gave you, there's lots of lists and there's lots of references, and they're all each line is something that could take more than 1-2.5 hour class. And so what often happens is when we're studying yoga, even with a scholar, we get just these brief little snippets of what something is, and we don't get the heartfelt experience of it. And I'm hoping to find, that it'll work somehow tonight, that we can both have the intellectual understanding as well as the heart feeling. Because really, to me, yoga is about the heart. Yoga is about our link or our connection with the absolute. What is the absolute? Well, there's so many different names and words. It's God, it's consciousness, it's energy. To me, the phrase that most fits is it's limitless love. And when I say limitless love, what I mean is it's pure, unconditioned love prior to relationships. It's pure beingness of love, of bliss. And actually, in many schools of yoga, what you hear the phrase Sat Chit Ananda very much. And Sat means beingness, our very truth. Chit means consciousness, our awareness. And Ananda means bliss. And Ananda means love. It's not often translated that way, which is very, very interesting. And it's been a very masculine-dominated field, I will say. But Ananda really does mean love. And so yoga is the study and the experience of the wisdom, the truth, the beingness, the understanding, the consciousness of love. So that's what I hope there'll be some opportunity for experience of, and we'll do some guided meditations and things like that where you can where hopefully this will come out. And there's going to be discussion, and I'm going to talk about stuff as well, okay? So that's just a little prelude, so to speak. So again, yoga is super vast. It's up to 5,000 years old. It incorporates, I don't think anyone's ever counted how many yogic scriptures there are, but they're in the tens of thousands. And many and most of them are considered to be direct downloads from the divine. So unlike our Judeo-Christian tradition, which basically has one, or you could call it two gigantic books, right? The Old Testament and the New Testament, the Torah and the New Testament Bible, right? Compared to all the texts in yoga, it's like minuscule. And of course, where there are people, there are disagreements and misunderstandings and other understandings, and everybody approaches everything from whatever level of consciousness they're at, whatever previous knowledge they have. And so all these sutras, all these scriptures, all the tantras, all of it are constantly being debated by the intellectuals, and this is right, and that's right, and this is right, and that's right. Yoga, however, is really understood to be not religious, but spiritual, so to speak. Yoga is really about the self-study, the Swa Tantra, the Swa Vidya, the study of the self. And so, even though there are many, many different schools of yoga, different branches of yoga, and etc., ultimately, yoga is what we find by going within. Now, it also, though, there are many different yogas, yes, and each of them provides a kind of systematic, scientific, and that word is used in yoga, study of the self. So it's not just me going inward and saying, oh, okay, I think, therefore I am, and that's it. Going in and saying, oh, okay, this is what it's like to be Kalisara, so everybody else must be that way. It's really something that's been systematized over, thousands of years, okay? But the yoga that we usually think of is, let's take a look at if you don't mind looking at your folder, okay? So just the first page. I can't believe I called this the big picture because, it's an overview, or it's probably a super underview of the big picture. So, it just starts here with yoga is the study of being. It provides method and roadmaps to the ultimate goal of Satchitananda, or awakening, or enlightening. And there are these various streams of yoga that started thousands of years ago. The earliest scriptures are called the Vedas. You've all heard of the Vedas. The Rig Veda, the Yajurveda, the Samaveda, the Atharva Veda. And these were kind of these were the texts actually out of which what we call the Hindu religion eventually developed. And they included lots of rituals and beliefs and formulas for how to stay healthy and how to have a happy marriage and things like that, as well as very sacred things. Then later on, there were the Upanishads. So I'm saying these words because these are probably words that you've all heard. I mean, some of you have known this for a very long time. But I just want to say the words. Let me back up a little bit. People get really put off sometimes by all the Sanskrit that we use in yoga, right? But that is its original language. It's considered to be a really sacred language. And Sanskrit can convey concepts that we just don't really have in English. However, Sanskrit, even one word in Sanskrit can be very confusing because it can have multiple meanings to various traditions and lineages. And also different traditions and lineages may use different words to describe the same thing. So if you get confused, trust me, you're with all of us. It's hard not to get confused when you actually approach the study of yoga. When we get beneath the mind stuff, though, that's where usually the confusion melts away. When we get beneath the intellectual and into the mystical, that's where the understandings begin to feel more unified, I guess I would say. But so to go back, so the Vedas were 1700 to 1100 before the Christian era. The Upanishads followed. And the Upanishads are absolutely beautiful texts. There are 200 of them, each espousing the Hindu philosophy, some of which is shared by Buddhism and Jainism. But the main, the creme de la creme of the Upanishads would be this saying, Tattvam Asi. Tattvam Asi. That thou art. And then it's said in many ways over and over and over again. And what it's really saying is, that which is divine is that which I am. And that all gets condensed into aham. Not just I am, but am. Beingness. Pure beingness. And that's the juice, that's the meat of all the Upanishads. But if you want to read some beautiful philosophical writings, the Upanishads are just amazing. They're poetic and just full of incredible mysticism. So then after the Upanishads, or somewhere around the same time, there were also these great big epics. There was the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, and these were the epics that talked about the exploits of all the gods. Okay? And so there are all these incredible stories of the gods and the goddesses and their interactions with the people. But the distillation of the Mahabharata is in the Bhagavad-Gita, which was actually probably not written till about 200 BC. And if you don't know about the Bhagavad-Gita, it means Song of the Lord. And the Bhagavad-Gita is a distillation of all the yogic Hindu philosophy up until that time. And it is actually the most read sacred text in the world, more read than the Bible, which is really interesting. You know, a lot of us Westerners wouldn't conceive that. And very interestingly, the Bhagavad-Gita is a story of being human. It's a story about being in the battleground of life and going, what the heck is this, and why should I do it, and what's the purpose? And Krishna, the avatar, the God, saying, well, we do it because we do it. And the trick is to do it skillfully. Whatever your destiny is, not just your destiny like given to you from on high, although that's part of it, but whatever your destiny is a unique individual soul and being in this world, learn the skills to do that beautifully, to do that wisely. And if you can be yourself wisely, then you will attain me, Krishna. You will become the God as well. And so it's an absolutely beautiful story that anybody, I think, can approach. So if you want to read one like scripture, I would say, of Hinduism, it would be the Bhagavad-Gita. And then I would still suggest that you have somebody helping you out with it a little bit, or at least have lots of footnotes. but yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. So that's kind of like what we now call Hinduism, which, by the way, do you know that the word Hinduism was not something that the Indian people who were practicing all this for thousands of years called themselves? At one point in time, they were discovered by some Westerners near the river Sindhu, and that became Hindu, and the Westerners just started calling everybody Hindus. And to them, they were people practicing just being. They were practicing being, and they were practicing being in nature, and they were practicing worshiping the divine as they saw it. And every other community had different understandings of who the divine was and who the gods and the goddesses were and what it meant, tattvam asi. But eventually we get into classical yoga. So this is the first time actually you're seeing the word yoga. The word was used long before that. The word was used back in the Vedas. But it's really not until the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali at about 400 before the Christian era that this really became the systematic study of awakening. So the Yoga Sutras, and I've got some examples of them in the back here, the most famous of which is Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, Yoga, union, linking, connection, connecting self to the great self, connecting everything to everything else, unifying. Yoga, chitta, awareness, consciousness, true consciousness. Vritti, the movement of consciousness, the movement of awareness. Nirodha, stilling. So yoga, union, is when the movement or the activity of awareness, of consciousness, ceases, stills, comes to that unity point of being. So this is where, so this is a very famous saying. It's very important because this is what our meditation is based on, right? All we ever hear is meditation is all about stopping the mind, stopping the thinking, and that goes back to this sutra. However, that's the first, well, it's actually the second line in the Yoga Sutras. The Yoga Sutras then go on. It takes 4 books to explain how that might happen and to explain how it's really, really hard to make it happen because of the way that our ordinary minds work and all the obstacles there are to seeing that we, the human being, is actually the being of the divine. So that's some of what we'll talk about tonight, is what those obstacles are, those kleshas that get in the way, that bind us. So there are 4 books in the Sutras of Patanjali, and the first one talks about the bliss. That's where we talk about Samadhi and what actually happens when we go into deep, deep meditation and all. But there's levels of everything. So this is something I just really want to say about yoga. There's levels of everything. There's levels of consciousness, there's levels of being, there's levels of reality. And so we can be in Samadhi. Everybody in this room, I'm sure, has had an experience with Samadhi in a meditation, in Reiki, or whatever, where there's that sense of everything stilling, right? And a sense of unity. And it's so beautiful. And this is what keeps us going, right? We want more of this. We want more of this. And we feel so much better physically when we're in it, when we've had a state like that. But there are different levels of it. And so I'm not actually sure if we're going to talk about the levels of Samadhi tonight or not, because this is a 2-part lecture, by the way. And then there's so that's the first book. The second book is the practice, the sadhana. Okay, the sadhana pada. Pada just means book. So this talks about how we practice and what we do to practice. Each one of you in here, I'm sure, has some kind of sadhana, and this is a word I would just really love everybody to learn. Those of you who are practicing Reiki as a spiritual practice, that's your sadhana. Those of you who are doing meditation regularly, that's your sadhana. Those who spend 15 minutes petting their cat in the morning and find that brings them to that stiller place within, that's your sadhana. We have all different methods of sadhana. Yoga invites us to have a systematic, regular sadhana. in order to attain the higher levels of consciousness, of awakening. And yet each one of us finds our own way to our sadhana. So I'm sure you're already thinking about it, but I want you to just take a moment now and close your eyes and think about your sadhana. What is it that you do on a regular basis? And it does not have to be that you do it every day for 2 hours. What do you do on a regular basis that brings you closer to your true nature, that brings you closer to your heart? And in yoga, you see, we understand that there are levels of everything. So when you're closer to your own heart rests in the great heart, the heart of the divine, the heart of consciousness. And so when we get closer to our own heart, our own self, we get closer to the great love, to the great self. So, thank you. I just wanted you to think about that for a moment and maybe even congratulate yourself for whatever it is that you do on however regular a basis it is that is your sadhana. I had a teacher once who used to talk about the beast of sadhana, which is very interesting, because our practice can take us to that deepest place within, and yet to get to that deepest place within, right? Yeah, we have to go through a lot of muck and mire a lot of the time. There's a lot of obstacles, and when we're in a deeper place and we're seeing with greater clarity, right, then that's when we tend to see those things, those patterns and those traumas and those personality stylistic ways of being that actually keep us from that whole truth. Not just the truth of our own nature, but understanding the truth within the nature of everyone. So there's the Samadhi pada, our bliss, the Sadhana pada, our practice, our Vibhuti pada. This one's really cool, and I've got a whole list of them. These are our superpowers. And these are the yogic superpowers that develop with consistent, deep meditation. Those of you who've been practicing Reiki for a while, what we're experiencing are cities. When you have that when you're constantly finding that there's synchronicities in life, when you're finding that you're more open and friendly and people are gravitating towards you, when you find that you don't even actually have to place your hands on someone and you feel energy pulsing, these are cities. These are mystical powers. And our practices of Reiki and of meditation bring these about. Now, they're not magical in the sense of not being real. They're completely and totally real. Because yoga talks, and we're going to talk tonight, about different levels of reality. And so when we're practicing yoga, right, and everybody in this room is a yogi, when we're practicing yoga, we're moving between different levels of consciousness, so that some of the same rules of space, time, and matter that we work with in ordinary consciousness don't necessarily apply when we're in a deep samadhi state in meditation or in Reiki. I kind of get ahead of myself here. Then the final book is the book of liberation, what it means to be truly awakened. So I'll be talking, okay, so I'm going to be conflating some of what I'm teaching you, because I'm going to be going back and forth between the teachings of classical yoga and Tantra yoga. They're the two that I've learned and the two that I've studied, and they fit really beautifully together, and I'm not always going to be labeling which one is which, because I kind of have a feeling you don't care too much. But, you know, if we were doing this in a really scholarly way, it would make a difference. So classical yoga and the yoga of the Yoga Sutras, which if anybody has taken yoga philosophy in like hatha yoga classes, you're getting mostly the study of the Yoga Sutras. But later came Tantra. And I love the word Tantra because it means to weave. It's the weaving of the threads of light. And it's so beautiful. And we talk about ourselves when we're doing our healing work as being light weavers, because we're bringing the threads of existence into being. Sometimes we have to pull out some of the threads, and we weave and we reweave, and that creates the beautiful tapestry of life. But Tantra said, well, wait a minute. We don't just want to get so high and so enlightened that we can't function as human beings. We want to become awakened, but we also want to be able to apply that awakened consciousness in all the other levels of consciousness. I don't want to get too pedantic here. Some Yoga Sutra specialists would say, well, yeah, we want that too. But the Yoga Sutras kind of only go that far. They say that the ultimate goal, right, is yoga, chitta, vritti, nirodha, to be in complete stillness. Well, we can't stay in complete stillness and survive, actually, right? Because we have to eat, we have to drink, we have to do, because we are, in many ways, human doings. So how do we let that kundalini, so to speak, rise up, awaken us, and then let that awakened consciousness then pervade ourselves so we can still be who we are. We can still actually even have a personality, right? And yet bring an awakened consciousness to what we're doing. And those of you who are Reiki masters, we talk about this. It's like, right, Reiki master, being a Reiki master is being the Reiki, is, yes, taking it in, understanding it, and letting it always be there and let it radiate out. And I think this happens too in meditation as we go deeper and deeper into the levels of consciousness in meditation. Ideally, then that radiates out. And we have all those great superpowers, including three of the most important superpowers of friendliness, tolerance, and actual love for other beings. So, but Tantra, it's very interesting because we're going to talk about a little bit later the structure of reality according to yoga. Tantra basically says it's not that there's me and the Supreme. There's only consciousness. There's only awareness. There's only love, so to speak. That's all there is. And that's what each one of us is. And that's what each one of us is made of. And the notion of there being a multiplicity of all of us is a beautiful notion, but that's just the play of consciousness. Consciousness itself is that which underlies all of us, and ultimately all of us are one. And that's the beautiful story that you've all heard so many times about the vast ocean and the waves, right? That each one of us are like waves of water on the top of the ocean, and waves jump up and they settle down and they get crashed into rocks, and they have such a story, and they spend most of their lives telling the story about their own individuality until suddenly there's a stillness that comes and the wave dissolves and becomes the ocean and recognizes that it really is the great stillness out of which everything arose. And so that is the ever-playing dance of Shiva and Shakti, of the masculine formlessness. And to say it's masculine is just a way of understanding. And the feminine form and manifestation that are actually always one. So that's the play of form and formlessness. So then, even after Tantra, comes Shakta Tantra. So I would just mention Shiva and Shakti. So Shiva and Shakti really looks a lot at Shiva, who, see, this is the thing, again, we're talking about levels. In most Hindu cultures, Shiva's this god that he slings a trident, just like Kali does, right? And he fights battles, and he does all kinds of things, and he cuts off the head of his wife's son, and that's how Ganesh comes into being, and all kinds of terrible stories. You would think he was a demon, but he's actually a demon slayer, and he's got armies, and he does all that, and he spends tens of thousands of years in a cave meditating. So he's a warrior and a meditator. Very, very interesting. And then there's that whole feminine principle of Shakti, and people who follow this brand, so to speak, of Tantra say that the masculine and the feminine are completely equal, and they are considered to be. But then there's a whole other branch that says, no. There is only one, and that one is the feminine divine. And that's when you guys hear me talking about Kali, how she's the creator and the destroyer. And one of her 10 forms, Bhuvaneshwari, is the creatrix of it all, and that the gods bow to her. And these are all the stories of the gods and the goddesses. And in a certain way, they're not yoga. Okay? These are the stories of the gods and the goddesses, and they're to help us understand, or to have metaphor for going through life. But yoga is about self-study. So that the importance of the study of the stories of the gods and the goddesses are as their archetypes for our own selves and our own experiences. And so to have an archetype that the feminine is completely self-sufficient and contains the masculine and the feminine, and the masculine is completely self-sufficient and contains the feminine and the masculine, these are beautiful archetypes, and we just hold them. But the practice of yoga, again, is seeing how it all pertains to not just moi, but by going inward and really seeing how I experience this in my consciousness. Then I begin to understand that my consciousness is your consciousness. And yet there's this play in which all these beautiful individual characteristics also arise. And sometimes those characteristics meld beautifully together with one another, and of course sometimes there's all kinds of conflict. And then we've got the battlefield. We're back to the Bhagavad-Gita on the battlefield of life. Okay. So just a little bit more about the gods and the goddesses. And I'm hoping, Shuddha couldn't be here tonight, Shuddha Rose, but she's going to be teaching a class next year on Kali and the Dasha Mahavidyas. So it's going to be all about the goddess and her 10 wisdom forms. So we'll get a lot of that then. But the gods and the goddesses are actually, especially in Tantra, they're not always considered to be like living beings, but they're forces. They're archetypal forces of consciousness. But then they're also often considered to be avatars, that there are human beings who are also godlike. Well, so Krishna was an avatar. Jesus is an avatar. Buddha is an avatar. And there are many human beings walking around today who may just be avatars. One of my favorite yogic philosophers is Sri Aurobindo, who lived in the first part of the last century. And he wrote about the human divine. And he's certainly not the first one, but he was so eloquent about it. And basically that's it. It's like if we do yoga, if we do union of the self, of the individual, right, with the divine, well then we are the divine. Right? And yet at the same time we still have our limitations of our physical body and all of that. But to begin to really understand these, it almost seems paradoxical. But when we approach it from a mystical way, then it's like, no, it's not paradoxical at all. Okay. I'm not going to talk about the main gods and goddesses because many of you know that. And actually, I'm going to move on for a moment and give us a little chance to digest some of this. Okay, so there's some things that are common to all systems of yoga. Let me do this better. Let me back up. So one of the things I love about yoga is it asks and answers the big questions. It asks the questions and gives answers to what does it mean to be alive and what does it mean to die? What is our true nature? And if it is true that we are that, why do we experience individuality? Why do we experience multiplicity and separation? How do we attain God consciousness? And what are the concealments that hide this from us? So in all yogas work about transformation in consciousness. That's really the goal. So those of you who are doing healing work, right? I always quote this African proverb that before healing, first there must be a change in consciousness. Right? So healing is about changing our consciousness, is about that transformation. And then another thing that's so common in yoga is as above, so below. Whatever we go through, whatever the system of our body goes through, is a holograph for what the system of the universe, the cosmos, is going through and experiences. And so yoga, as old as it is, has been teaching us physics from the very beginning to understand this kind of holographic model that we hear so much about in these days. And then yoga also, it far surpasses any Western psychology as far as I'm concerned. So the as above, so below in the Yoga Sutras is yata tatra tatanyatra. And it means, as it is here, in this body, so it is elsewhere. So that what happens in this physical body is a mirror of what's happening in the cosmic body. I'm kind of running around, so I'm not sure that you're going to be finding this in your... So go to the structure and reality of the person in yoga. The structure of reality and the person in yoga. Page 3. But before we do that, so in classical yoga, it's all about Purusha and Prakriti, self and matter, or soul and matter, or the absolute and matter. So our bodies are Prakritic. They're the activity, they're movement of energy of the limitless love, right? Our bodies are the vrittis, and so they're always in movement. And the Purusha is like the essence or the soul. So it's the difference between the absolute and the relative. But you see, we tend to think of ourselves, let me back up. The egoic self defines itself through what it takes in through its senses and how it intellectually interprets and understands them, right? And so we define ourselves, we identify ourselves by what we see, feel, touch, taste, and do in the world. Our bodies are made so that we look outward, we experience, we grasp, we do all of this. And that's how we usually think of ourselves. And yet, what we know, one of the things that we do as humans, like our bodies age, for example. So how we were seeing, perceiving, grasping, and reaching when we were a child is a little bit different than how we do it now. But are we the same being as we were when we were a child? Right? And we all know, of course we are. Well, how do we know that? Because everything in our body has shifted. You know, our cells have changed 1,000,000 times. Well, every 7 years, or whatever it is. Since we were children, and some of us who are old, it's probably been 1,000,000 times. But so, if we take a moment and close your eyes and you go within, and I know you've all done this before, and you're not looking in a mirror, you're not seeing yourself in that way. What is it that you're seeing with your eyes closed? What is it that you're experiencing with your eyes closed? So you're not necessarily experiencing your body of matter. You're not necessarily even experiencing your body of movement. The you that's experiencing it may be aware that the body is moving, and you may call that your body. This is my body. But the you that's aware of that is what? And that's what we would call the individual Purusha, the individual self, the individual soul, so to speak. So the ego self that's identified with all our movements nests inside the soul self, the Purusha. And then that is nested inside Purusha with a capital P, the great self. So, you're all with me here?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to do, I promise you, we'll get to a little meditation in a moment. So I just want to speak to you first about the levels of consciousness. And some of you have heard about this many, many times. But that self that's walking around and defining itself by what it's doing and what it's going to do next, and moving around and taking care of all the tasks and doing all the activities, and even having some self-reflection like, oh gosh, I guess I shouldn't have eaten so much at dinner, or whatever it may be, i.e. self-judgment. That's the egoic self, right? But that's our ordinary conscious self. That's what we're doing most of the time, and it's how we define ourselves most of the time. Then we have another level, right, that's much more subtle, and that's the level of dreaming. So when I'm in ordinary consciousness, everything is like in reference to me. I'm going to get in the car, I'm going to do that. Oh, that fire is getting me hot. You know, there's all this me. Then that's the ego itself. Then when we're in dreaming, right, it's a little different. It's still me. It's still all about me. My dream is all about me, and all, and all the characters who are my characters, and etc. So there's still this self-identity, right, in dreaming. But I'm not tied into this physical world. So when I'm dreaming, I could be here with you guys one moment, and the next moment in my dream, I'm in the park over there, looking up at the stars or something like that. And I didn't even have to get up and walk and go over there to be there, because I'm in a different level of consciousness or reality. And dream state is a very interesting state. The shamans refer to dream state all the time. And so sometimes in our meditations, we're in a kind of dream state. There's still a sense of I, and there's still a sense of agency. I am doing, I am being, I am thinking. I'm the one that's doing this. But then we are in actual deep sleep, right? And that sense of I-ness drops off. So that when we're in deep sleep, we're not thinking, We're not doing anything. There's a resting that's happening, but there's no witness watching what's happening and saying, oh, I'm sleeping now. I mean, occasionally actually that does happen, but that's a very advanced practice, to be witnessing even while you're in deep sleep. So that sense of I drops off. And it's only remembered when you wake up in the morning. And then it's like, oh, I'm awake now. Now what am I going to do? And oh my gosh, I had a good night's sleep, or that was a bad night's sleep, or whatever. How do I even know that? I know it because I'm paying attention to my body. Oh, my body feels rested. My body doesn't feel rested. But I don't actually remember anything that happened when I was in deep sleep. I might remember my dreams, right? But I don't remember the deep sleep. Then there's yet another level that's kind of similar to that, in the sense that the I-ness is no longer there. But unlike deep sleep, in which there's no awareness, the fourth state, or turiya, there's full awareness without all the movement, the vritti, of the I. Pure awareness. And this is a state, this is also called the transcendental, that all of you have been in when you've meditated, when you've done Reiki, maybe even when you've been out in nature, right? It's like, there's no me here. There's just this awareness. And it may be that beauty brought it on, it may be that calmness brought it on, or peace, maybe because those vrittis have ceased. Sometimes there's a bit of a witnessing of like, but it's an awe state. It's a bliss state. It's absolutely wonderful. To the extent that I have any consciousness of it, it's like, wow. And this may be the state in which, there's visions and there's colors and there's things like that. But all of those are still the vrittis. Those are all still activities. Truly, we look for the turiya state to be completely transcendent of the I. So then, beyond that, which is very interesting, because I know many of you have been in this state as well, is the Daivya Chakshu, so the celestial state. This is what we call the God realm. And this is when we're actually working in different realms of consciousness. Time-space is different. Beings are different. We experience light beings. We experience guides. We may experience avatars or siddhas, or divinities. It's really considered to be the heavenly realm. And I know that many of you have experienced this. You've experienced it when you've had an interaction with a beloved who has passed, and that kind of thing. And so for many people, that heavenly realm is considered that's the utmost. And it may be that is considered to be the utmost in some of the traditional religiosity of Hinduism, of Buddhism, and certainly of Christianity and Judaism. Heaven is it. That's all we want. It is heaven. But yoga says, wait a minute, beyond that, there's unity consciousness, where it's not about gods and goddesses or light beings or angels or guides or me as an awakened soul or anything like that. It's just pure unity, and it's that understanding that everything is one. And that's called Atma Vyapti. Atma means the self. It's one of those words, though, that it means the self of the ego, it means the self of the personal soul, and then it means the great self. And so the Atma Vyapti is being permeated more and more and more by the great self. Now, these are levels of consciousness, but they're also considered to be levels of reality. So the laws of nature are different from one of these to the next. Okay, in ordinary consciousness, we got to deal with solid things, and we got to deal with things falling on our heads and bumping us and things like that. In dream states, we can have something fall on our head, and it could either cause us to run a marathon, or it would cause no pain, or it would cause a pain that was way beyond what it's supposed to be, because it's all symbolic in dreams. Maybe it's really all symbolic here too. And then in deep sleep, none of that matters. I mean, if we were truly in deep sleep and something fell on our head and bumped us, if we stayed in deep sleep, we wouldn't wake up from it. Thank goodness we do wake up, because that's how our physical body reacts. And then when we're in the heavenly realms, it's a total different interaction, where it's like, yeah, you can connect with the being there, but you just kind of go right through each other, right? Because the matter thing is way, way different. And then ultimately, there's even cosmic consciousness, and this is what I call limitless love. It's the really big time. There is only one, and there is it's pure awareness, but there's no individual awareness of pure awareness, if that makes sense. Yeah, and so that's the 7th level. So these are levels of consciousness, but they're also levels of awareness. No, they're levels of consciousness, they're levels of reality. And so I'm going to ask you to close your eyes now. And we're going to just do a little journeying through these different levels of reality. So, first, you can have your eyes closed and be in waking consciousness, but you kind of have to activate your senses. So maybe like tap your knees or tap someplace and just, feel yourself, right? And you could picture yourself. And then have awareness of whatever thoughts you're thinking. Yeah. And just think about how much... How you take things in, sights, sounds, even the words that I'm saying, right? How are you taking them in? What are you doing with them? Are you thinking about them? Are you coming up with ideas about them? Are you questioning? Or, with your eyes closed now, this is taking you into a slightly subtler realm. Understanding that thoughts are actually more subtle than our physical sensations. So a kind of dream state, where you can use your imagination not to follow each word that I'm saying in any kind of precise way. But as a trigger or a step for your own creativity, your own imagination. Your own internal senses. And now please take a long, deep inhalation and exhalation through your nose. And begin to imagine you're asleep. You can't do it really, but try. Try to imagine sleep, that blessed state of rest. Again, we can't really do it as long as we're thinking. And then wake up. Sorry. We come into another state, right? We move back and forth between these two. I didn't really mean to do it quite that hard, but okay. All right. Now, go back in as best you can. After that rude awakening, but that's sometimes what it's like getting up in the morning, yeah? And now begin to watch watch your consciousness begin to deepen. So the thing about sleep is we only recognize it when we wake up. But here, in Turiya, in the fourth state, there is a kind of witnessing. And it's not just a witnessing of what's going on in our physical body or our mind. It's the beginnings of the witnessing of our pure beingness. You may still feel your pulse. You may still be listening to auditory cues. But take another deep inhalation and exhalation through your nose. And let it go a little deeper. And notice who you are right now. Who am I in this moment? Are you the witness? Are you the being, the pure awareness? So I'm sure that each one of you in this room has experienced these four states. And many of you have experienced the fifth state. That state of being in another realm without being anywhere that is not here. Perhaps this happens when you pray. Perhaps this happens when you're doing Reiki healing. Perhaps this happens when you visualize someone or something that's sacred to you in your meditation. In shamanic journeying, with some of the symbols that we use in Kali Ki. Perhaps there are colors, lights, sounds that are sacred, like the music of the spheres. Now perhaps, just perhaps, any of these visions, sounds that are happening internally are recognized as you are that. Tattvamasi, that thou art. not by thinking about it, but by just being, knowing, experiencing, non-separation from what you see and experience. And finally, just a trust. A trust that what I am, what you are, is the one vast ocean of consciousness. This is an ocean without end. An ocean without earth below, an ocean without sky above. To call it an ocean, to call it being, to call it consciousness, awareness, energy, love, diminishes it. This is being with no name, no identity, pure essence, indescribable. Completely known and yet unknowable. Is there anyone that would be willing to share anything about what that experience was like, or any questions? I've really talked a lot. I'll try not to talk so much in the second half, but any questions, thoughts, impressions, debates?
Well, when I haven't been meditating that long, so but what I felt, or what sort of floated into my mind or something, was the word "is." I know we're not supposed to be thinking, but it just came into my head, is, and I was able to, for just a bare second, feel like, oh, is. It just, everything is. It just is here. It's existing. It's whatever.
That's beautiful. That's exactly it.
So it was kind of exciting to me.
That's very exciting. And for just a moment, that's all we need, is a moment. Because
a glimpse,
a glimpse. And that glimpse is actually eternal, right? Because when we're in that moment, there's no time. Anyone else?
share. The interesting thing, and I think I have experienced this before, is that, you get into this place that feels so, it just feels so good that I don't want to come back, and it's like, then there's the voice, because it's like I'm just in this place of love, and then I have to come back, and I don't want to, and then the me is like, we gotta come back, and so that's it's an interesting experience, because there's both, that wonderful feeling, and then there's also that sadness of
So one of the ways to think about this, though, it's very interesting. If you're thinking, I don't want to come back, you've already come back.
Yeah.
Because when you're there, you're there, and there's no thinking, there's no me, there's no. It's like when we're coming out very gradually. It's like we're coming out like the edge of a tunnel almost, and we're looking back and we're going, oh,
yeah, like me.
Yeah. Oh, I want to be there again. But so you're already out. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
So, but sometimes when we're like just that far out, so to speak, on the edge, sometimes then we can go back in. And that's why when meditation, it's like, okay, you start thinking, you go back to the mantra, you go back in. You could come, you start thinking, you just go back in. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work as well as we'd like it to. But yes, those moments are like, oh. So then the question is, this is the whole second half of the lecture, so I won't do too much right now. It's like, so what brings us back? What doesn't, why can't we just stay there? It's us. I am that. Why can't I just stay there? And that's where we get into the obstructions, the kleshas, what is the ego, and all of that. So we're going to hold off on that. But yeah, that's it begs that question. Well, why did I come back? And did I really go anywhere? There's that question as well. Or did I actually just become more of what I already am?
Yeah, and all of it just is.
And all of it just is, exactly. And that's the dance. It's like, it's an inhalation and an exhalation. It's the inhalation and the exhalation of the divine. And this is, so many of you know about the dance of Shiva, the dance of Kali, that there's something arises, there's manifestation. It has its moment or years or eons of presence and existence, and then it dissolves back in to the one. And you see that dissolving, it's like that's going back home. There's home, so to speak, that place. Unity. Arising as an individual thing, having your moment as that wave, and then we get to dissolve back in, right? But then, why aren't we all excited all the time if we get to come alive and then we get to die again? And why aren't we all excited if, I get to be really healthy and then I get to be sick? And, we don't get too excited about those things. So why not? And the why not has to do with, there's two more steps to that dance. There's manifestation, there's presence, there's dissolution, but there is concealment or obstruction or whatever. It's like we are the divine doing the dance, and we're hiding from ourselves what we actually are. We're dancing with ourselves. The divine is dancing with itself, and that's us. And we don't get that we're the divine. That's all concealed from us until the next step, anugraha, which means grace or revelation. And that's what we're going for, right? That's what we're doing when we're meditating. We want the grace. We want the revelation. Well, grace, right? You can't just ask for grace, right? We have to be devoted. We have to practice. We have to love. And then it's just, if it happens. But revelation can actually come with some of these systematic practices. And, of course, we want a combination of both and all of that. And all we can do is ask. But who are we asking? What are we asking? And so, and then the idea is it's not just like I arise, I exist, I dissolve. Everything is doing that at the same time, and it's not. I'm not just doing that like I'm born, I live, I die. Every cell in my body is doing that constantly. Every thought is arising, having its moment, dissolving back in. Every emotion is arising, dissolving, arising, having its moment, going back in. And then all these interactions, it's happening like everywhere. It's all this gigantic weave, this gigantic wovenness, this huge tantra. And that's karma. That's the karma, not just of my karma, but the karma of your karma and the universal karma. And sometimes it gets really knotted up. And so we have practices that can help us to unknot. Right? Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
So are these general questions?
Yeah. Related to yoga, healing, or meditation.
Well, okay. So I'm still stuck in the info part.
Yeah.
Of
Good.
I guess I didn't realize, because I haven't studied it enough, that the lineage for yoga and Hinduism came down kind of together. And so, but is it considered separate, or is yoga the mystical practice and Hinduism the religious practice, or how does that work? I'm just interested to know a little bit more. Because we use so many,
that's a good question.
And
First
I'm
of all,
trying to tease it out because we're using so many terms that are found that are Hinduism, and the Bhagavad-Gita I read because a Hindu person gave it to me, and so
Right, but so yoga really got used in terms of classical yoga later on with the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, but everything in there depended on everything that had come before, especially the Upanishads and the wisdom in the Upanishads. So yoga in many ways encompasses a lot of the classical Hinduism, the ancient Hindu things. However, yoga also there's yoga in Buddhism. There's Tantra in Buddhism as well. And yoga itself, like if you read the Yoga Sutras, it does talk a lot. It talks about the Lord, but it's not really referring to any particular God or Godhead. It's really talking about the Supreme Consciousness.
Okay.
And yet, one of the paths of yoga is Bhakti Yoga. Okay, Bhakti Yoga is worship. Mm-hmm. It's devotion. And so Bhakti Yoga says you can get there by worshiping, but you could be worshiping Tara, Kuan Yin, Jesus. We're doing yoga if we're doing a systematic kind of sadhana and self-inquiry is one way to look at it. So yes, it does incorporate a lot of that, but you can also, we're doing yoga in Kali Ki Reiki because we're doing a systematic sadhana practice and self-inquiry. That's how I would say it, and also because yoga is all about really trying to develop that consciousness where we really understand, we don't just use the words, but we really understand unity. So we can get there through bhakti, devotion. We can get there through, there's Raja Yoga, which is a lot about meditations, and then there's Karma Yoga, which is a lot about action and service, and then Jnana Yoga, which is about wisdom and knowledge. I would say I'm more of a Jnani because for me it's a lot about mystical experience being integrated with knowledge, which is wisdom. And yoga, the classical yoga of Patanjali is definitely Jnana Yoga, but there's always devotion. And, in addition to being a Jnani, I also am a devotee. I'm a devotee of Kali. So everything in yoga gets all mushed together, right, because it's such an ancient tradition. Do you want to, something you want to offer, Marcy? As a long-time yoga teacher?
when I was in India, I was having a conversation with an Indian gentleman about this sort of thing, and he said, we were talking about various deities, and he said, he just stopped himself in mid-spate, and he said, if there's only one God, you know.
Yeah.
It's like there are 33,000 deities,
Yes.
but only one God. So the deities represent, one way to envision it is that they represent different aspects of divinity.
Yeah.
Or, patron saints, or
Yeah.
whatever you want, whatever relates to that.
Yeah.
So don't we do that? We do that too.
Well, yeah, I understand that part about Hinduism. I was just trying to figure out.
But that is yoga.
Okay.
And yoga is like taking out the trash with intention. It can be the yoga of intention as well. And dualism, John's going to get into, Kalisara is going to get into this, so I don't want to tangle up more threads, but there are many interpretations, but the word yoga comes from the same root word as yoke, linking together. So one interpretation is that it's linking together Purusha and Prakriti, the physical manifestation and the spiritual manifestation coming together in oneness. Mm-hmm. And in Tantra, it's saying, it's all that. You can go through all these steps, going deeper and deeper and deeper into your understanding. In some expressions, disciplining the physical in order to manifest more of the spiritual. Mm-hmm. But in Tantra, it comes full circle. Yep, you do all that, you come to a deeper and deeper and deeper spiritual understanding or manifestation, and then you come back around and you say, and all of this is good too. And as Kalisara was saying, we live in this world, and to be able to be spiritual beings in this world is big. The world needs it. We need it. As someone much smarter than I once said, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. Or as one of my yoga masters said, you are God having a Marcy experience.
Having a what?
A Marcy experience. Yeah. Seeing what this is like. And that is really helpful when things are feeling a little rocky, when those threads are getting knotted, to think, this is just what is. I don't have to get all caught up in the tangle. I can just see it as what is right now. And then I go into my spiritual self. I go into my sadhana. I'm whole and complete as a being. And I don't have to get all tangled up in that stuff. I can just witness it and know that it will change. Just like the waves manifesting, and they have their moment, and then they sink back into the ocean of consciousness. The weather will change. I don't think I yet. Oh, another thing about Hindu, one of the... See, I came back. One of the explanations that I heard long, long ago is the term was applied to anybody who lived on the other side of the river Indus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those folks, they're Hindu. So a very broad term for a very large population of people with variations on the theme. So, and thousands of years. Look what's happened to Christianity in 2,000 years, and all the variations there, and Islam in a very short period of time. There are many, many, many expressions of it, and certainly in the Eastern thought that falls under the kind of loose bailiwick of Hinduism. There's a great deal of variety. And Buddhism came from Hinduism. Yeah. So there's a lot of commonality, including Sanskrit. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't know all of that. I'm just trying. I guess my question was, I was just trying to figure out the yoga, Hinduism.
So
think
of
which
yoga
came first.
I got
not so much as a timeline, but the systematic self-study. and the study of consciousness. Because yoga is really about, in order to find our union, our link, we have to transform out of our ordinary level of consciousness. We have to experience the whole, all 7 levels. And I was going to go into the koshas next, and we need to experience all the 5 bodies. And that's how we make our transformations. So it's not so much about when and historical, but a lot of the concepts that I'm talking about that are methodologies for doing this consciousness change come from the classical yoga, which was Patanjali, the Yoga Sutras, and then the later Tantra. So it to me, from what I've studied, these are the 2 best inroads to understanding our psychology and how we work as human beings, and our cosmology as well. So when we were just doing those levels of consciousness, those are levels of reality. That's our cosmology. That's what happens in reality. And then if you go to, I'm digging in now. At the back, you've got the 36 tattvas of Tantric cosmology chart. It takes a very long time to truly understand this. So I can't go into this in a huge amount of depth. But what you'll see is it starts at the top with the absolute, the universal, the ultimate reality, the macrocosmic consciousness. And it's got a name, Param Shiva. That's just the highest Shiva. That would be what we were talking about when we were talking about cosmic consciousness, or pure limitless love, or whatever. And then there's levels even of divinity here, and that's on the top. So the top part is the Sat Chitananda, the being, consciousness, bliss. Then we have next the psychical tattvas. A tattva means a principle of reality. These are not things, they're not graspable, but they're principles of reality. And at the top of that one, you'll see Maya. So we always hear about Maya as illusion. So Maya is that, but Maya is also Prakriti. It's the beginnings from pure, absolute, undifferentiated consciousness, which has no sense of an individual I-ness whatsoever, pure being, to the beginnings of the separation or differentiation. So when we're experiencing each other in this room, we're experiencing differentiation. When we're in cosmic consciousness, there is no difference. We recognize that it's only an ocean. Not just that we are part of the ocean, but there's only the ocean. But Maya, which is a feminine principle, begins to differentiate. And how she does this is really fascinating. These are called the 5 kanchikas, the cloaks. She's cloaking the universal so that we can so that God can have that experience of Marcy. Or Marcy can be God for us. Our Marcy. Yeah, right, they're both Marcys. Isn't that great? Right. So that's the dance. That's the activity, so to speak, of that which is absolute and non-active. It's paradoxical. Noelle?
I have a question. It's kind of a question that came up when with the discussion of, the dual aspect in the Yoga Sutras, and then the non-dual. Can it? And I was like, my original question was like, well, can it be both? But does the Tantric explanation really encompass the dual as well by saying,
yes, it does.
Now I'm going to say that the consciousness absorbs into that illusion of separateness.
Yeah, that's ego, one way of looking at it. So dualism means there's the absolute and there's the relative.
Right.
It doesn't really ask, well, how does the relative come into being? Well, it sort of does. Okay, and there's the absolute and there's the relative. There's Purusha and there's Prakriti, matter, and we're all mostly in the relative world. That's our ordinary state of consciousness, including sleeping, and dreaming. And then Tantra basically says everything is consciousness, pure, simple, only consciousness. But there are things that bind consciousness that make us have this sense of differentiation. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, the word for those things that bind is actually mala. It's not the same as these. Mm-hmm. And they're like, they're knots. And so we have this binding sense of, I am an individual separate from the divinity. And this is what begins to form our ego. And not only that, but I am the agent of my actions. I am the doer. Well, I'm not the doer because I am not this. I am that. Mm-hmm. But that's one of our illusions. It's one of our beliefs. So the belief that I'm a separate individual, Anu, an atomic being separate from, and then the belief that I am the doer, and then also the belief that objects are separate. Now, we all know that to exist in this world, we kind of have to have those beliefs, right? But what we want to be able to do is transform consciousness so we can transcend those things and we can still act in the world. That's Tantra. That's the non-dualism. It's like, okie dokie. It's not that this isn't real. This is real. But real is also the whole. And so there are differences. So this is tantric, but there's something very similar in dualistic yoga. But so start thinking about this cloaking or this knotting, these malas. Okay, so I feel separate, so I believe I'm separate. But when I'm in my mystical self, when I'm at that fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh level of consciousness, I know better. It's not the I that knows better. It's the beingness, the isness that just is. I come back into my individual self and I go, oh, okay, that's that isness. Okay, so in this moment, I feel separate, but I understand that I'm not. Now, we don't even want to just understand that because then that's too intellectual. We want to be able to experience the isness, and we want to actually experience the isness at the same time we're experiencing our separation. That's full awakening in Tantra. And if not at the same time, there's one of the Shiva Sutras that talks about this. It's like we become Shiva, and we bring our Shivaness back to our ordinary consciousness. And that's what we talk about in Reiki Mastery all the time. It's like, yes, we become the Reiki. We bring it back. But we're not in a state of stupor or a state of total bliss where we can't talk or think all the time because we still want and need to do that. But so taking this down, Maya comes in and she has these cloaks. So what she does is she limits the omnipotence of the divinity by creating limited agency or the capacity to act. Kala. So the understanding is that the supreme, the divine, that which I am, which you are, is omnipotent, omniscient, has fullness of heart, has full creative power and omnipresence, and is pure eternal awareness, limitless love, right? So that's what everything really is. That's the isness of being. But it gets cloaked or contracted so that then we have this sense of, oh, but I am the one who's acting, and oh, I have this knowledge. But when we walk around talking about all our knowledge, that's considered ignorance, actually. Because everything that we know and think we know, right, is only a fractal, so to speak, an infinitesimal fractal of the pure bliss, wisdom, knowledge of everything. And then the just pure limitless love gets contracted or cloaked into a desire or a longing to be full again, which is what you were talking about, like, oh, I was full, oh, I want that back, give it back to me, that kind of thing. And then that gets translated into desire, which can get translated into our addictions and, all of those things. But here we're just talking about moving from the cosmic slowly. Here these are called the psychical tattvas. We're still not actually in our relative world self here. Let me just finish this one. And then finally, Kala. This is not Kali. Kala limits the eternal awareness and creates time and the sense of sequential awareness. And actually that is one of the acts of Kali, the goddess. So that there is, in pure consciousness, there is no time, there is no space. Right. And if we don't have time or space, everything is the eternal present. There can be no sequence. So we could have no sense of a life of being born and living and dying. We could have no sense of a sentence, so to speak. There's no sequential in the absolute. There's nothing sequential because everything is happening right now. And so Maya restricts those things so that we can have this experience. And it's not just so we can have this experience, it's exactly what Marcy said. So that Shiva, the absolute God, can experience him, her, itself. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're doing. We're like one of the bazillion eyes on an ant. It's one of the ways I like to think of it. Janae?
I was thinking about sadhana.
Yeah.
That is the practice that helps you to tap into that oneness, the beingness.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So our sadhana, so when we do Reiki, right, a lot of times we do that, especially sometimes when we're receiving Reiki, we just like, where'd I go? Mm-hmm. Well, the I didn't go anywhere. The I just became the great self and just, became what it actually is. I went into my true nature. And my true nature is the true nature. Yeah, and so our meditations do that, our prayers can do that, our devotions can do that, walks in nature can do that, except, walking in nature, and actually if we're giving Reiki, right, we still have to have some bodily actions going on, and the body still has to have some control. Okay, so here we go. So we're the cosmic supreme, right, the ocean itself, and remember, this is an ocean without sides, without bottoms, without tops. It's just pure isness. And then it gets cloaked. It's actually getting cloaked for its own benefit, so it can kind of see itself, right? Mm-hmm. Just like we can't see ourselves, it's almost like the divine doesn't see it. That gets too technical. The arguments about it get too technical. We not go there. Now we get into the physical tattvas and the relative world. Oh, here we have Purusha and Prakriti, the soul, the male principle of, and now this mimics the great Param Shiva, which has no sense of I-ness, which just is isness. But this is our own soul. This is the thing, we did that little exercise at the beginning, which you've all done, of what is that sense of me that stays with me, whether I'm 2 or whether I'm 85. And it's still me. And it never feels young or old. It's just me. It's the aham of me. And then Prakriti, the female principle, the active movement, always creating. It's the creative principle, really, is what Prakriti is. So Maya cloaks so that we have this sense of, oh, I'm a soul and I'm a being, a body. Not just a body, right? But I'm also a being that has thoughts, emotions. Those are very subtle. They have nothing to do with the physical. And our thoughts, sometimes these days we get confused about neuroscience. Well, we can see our thoughts, right? Because we can see those neurons firing. We can't see our thoughts. The neurons firing are an epiphenomenon of our thoughts, meaning that they, you define epiphenomenon. It's just something that occurs, but the thoughts are the thoughts, and they're not happening because of the neurons. It's something that happens secondarily to our thoughts and our subtle experiences. Okay, this is where it gets really cool, I think, because this is the psychology. Okay, so then we have these 3 levels of a sense of self. We have the buddhi, which is intelligence. It's our intellect. It's our ability to discern things. Okay, and we have our ahamkara. That's the word for our ego. It's very interesting, the word ahamkara. Aham, the amness, the being, the isness. Aham, am. Now, we can also say I am, but ahamkara. And then kara is, oh my gosh, I forgot. I suddenly forgot what it means. Wait a minute. Oh, it means doing. That's what it means. So actually, the ahamkara is the doing self. Isn't that interesting? The ego is the doing self, kind of versus the being self. And of course, we know that ego has all kinds of other. It has multiple functions. And next time we'll talk about some of those functions, and we'll talk about more. So we've got the cloaks of the cosmos. This is what we're talking about right now. And then within our ego, and hopefully I'll get to them, we also have various obstructions that keep us from recognizing this cosmic beingness, if you will. So the self is the buddhi, the intelligence. It's like it's pure intelligence, whereas manas is our mental functioning. It also means mind, but it's, I'm going to explain this differently when we go into the koshas, so I'm just going to leave it there. It's like we've got pure intelligence, and then we've got the mental functioning of the mind, which is like the structure of how the brain works. So I can't take it any further than that right now. So I want to go down. So all of those then yield these separations of our sense organs and our action organs, which rest on the subtle elements. So the vibration of sound, the impact of touch, the energy of light and form, viscous attraction, taste, cohesive attraction, smell. But these are all related to what are called the gross elements, the Mahabhutas: earth, water, fire, air, and space. So we're gone now, you see, from pure isness to incarnation, right? That we are made of the elements of the earth, or of being earth, water, fire, air. So it's like they meet, and right in the middle of that, of course, is our ego and our sense of individual self. It can, like I said, it can take a very long time to truly understand this, but it's a progression actually that's always happening in all directions, both directions at once. So if it weren't for the cosmos, we wouldn't have an earth. If it weren't for the divine and the cloaking on it, there wouldn't be an earth. But there is an earth, and then out of the earth, or any earth, doesn't have to be this one, come all the elements that comprise us. And then in the middle there, we've got this little egoic being who forgets that it is that. And that's what our ego thinks, so to speak, that it is totally the one in control. It's the one that is the me. It defines itself based on mostly the stuff from here down. Okay? And it totally forgets. It's like it's clustered inside, and it can't see what it's inside of anymore. And what it's inside of, right, the ego, is inside of the soul self, the Purusha, which is inside of the great Purusha, the great soul, the great everything. That's exactly what we are. So we think we're made out of some separate substance, right, from the only substance that there is that is non-substantial. And that's how we walk around. And so it's kind of cool. It's a gift, right? But, of course, we tend to abuse it. Molly?
Just to crystallize it down for myself, it just seems like it's, from the isness, the only way to experience it is to make up all these little details on all these ways to experience itself, and that's what the material world is.
Yes.
And it's so distracting that we forget about the isness.
Well, there was a great.
It's so engaging.
That's exactly it. It pulls. There's this outward pull.
Where you came from.
This is which is why yoga is the inner science. So we come back in, so that we can recognize that. And recognize that we are that, the isness, the being, the limitless love.
And see all of it, and not just the part. Not
Yes.
just this little part
And we
of it.
can't actually, with our little ego self, with our mahadrendriyas, our whatever they are, tanmatras, we can't actually see it,
Right.
but we can be it. We can know it. We can be the knower. And when we are the knower, when we recognize not only are we the knower, but we're that which is known, and we are the means by which knowledge takes place, those three then collapse, and that's the divine, that's the supreme, and that's when we become the divine supreme, the divine human. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So the ego, it's a kind of a case of mistaken identity, but it gets us through the world, all right? And the thing is, it gets so attached to all those things that draw us out there. It's absolutely convinced that that's all there is. And most people walk around, this is all there is. And when we in Kali Ki and yoga and other things start talking about other realms, eyes roll, right? Because, that's impossible. But we just did a meditation that gave us glimpses into, yes, there really are multiple levels of consciousness, and whatever we experience, it's only an eensy-beensy glimpse or bit of it. It, as we practice years and years and years, there's more and more of it that we can experience. But awakening is a never-ending process. So I want to go back now to the koshas. So you have this. It's in the very back. So just like Maya, sometimes known as Mahaprakriti. Never mind, those are too many distinctions. Okay, just as Maya puts a cloak on the cosmic universal, okay, there's also the koshas are cloaks or sheaths of the individual human being. This is where we really get into what happens when we're doing Reiki healing and when we're doing meditation, as humans. Okay, so, and I've explained this to some of you. Some of you have seen this, but not everybody has. And as far as I'm concerned, I could go over this again and again and again myself to truly understand it. So there are 3 levels of bodies in yoga, and they're the gross body, the subtle body, and the causal body. The gross body, and it's just a word because it's gross. It's got mass. Is called the Annamaya Kosha, which is so interesting. It's the food sheath, and it actually will include. It's not just that our body is food, but our body is food. We exist on this planet by eating off of ourselves, so to speak. We are this planet, and we eat ourselves. I mean, it's what we do, and we consume ourselves. Now, we could also talk about how way over consuming we are and how we're destroying our planet, and that's we had that conversation when Doug Wilson was here. But that's not what I'm, and it's very important, but that's not what I'm trying to portray here. It's the physical mass. Now, what is physical mass? Well, it's really just vibrating energy.
It's a vibrating energy.
Yeah. So physical mass is not as massive or gross as we think of it, but compared to these other levels of body, it is more gross, more dense. Consciousness moves between the dense and the subtle. Hello. Hi. Welcome. Thank you. I hope you can catch up with us. So it's great that you were able to come. Jennifer, this is wonderful. No, we started at 6.
At 6?
I'll catch up. I just know it. I'm so sorry.
Welcome. Oh, I hope this makes some sort of sense. Find a place. There's a chair over there, and just take a moment. Just take a couple deep breaths while you just center in. And actually, could one of you show her the chart we're looking at the very back?
This one at the very back. Oh, I made it.
Okay. I'm so glad you came. It's, you know,
Oh my God.
it's
I'm embarrassed.
it's wonderful. It's really wonderful. Okay, so we're talking about levels of body. So we've got our gross body, our physical body. Then we have the subtle bodies. Now these are the ones that you can't really touch, so to speak. And that starts with the Prana, Maya, Kosha. Maya, you got that word, that which collapses things. And Prana, the life force energy. This is the subtle body we talk about all the time. This is the you know, the nadis and the chakras and all of that. You'll see it's actually not in a certain way such a high thing as we sometimes like to praise the subtle body, and it's all about moving our energy and all of that. Well, it is, but it's okay. So this is like the next level, and these levels work with each other. They interact with each other, so that the gross body has an impact or a resonance in our subtle body, and then our subtle body has an impact or resonance in our physical body. That's why, for example, when we're doing Reiki, we're not manipulating the physical body, but the physical body feels better. Also, when we're doing Reiki, we're not manipulating the mental body, right? But the mental body feels better. And it's because we're working in this subtle realm, which is a non-material realm. It's an energetic realm. Same is true when we're meditating. You know, we can be meditating, and besides, it hurts our back to sit so upright, and our hips when we get older to sit cross-legged, but we feel better. We feel better physically, and we feel better mentally when we meditate, usually. So the subtle body consists of the vital shield, the chakras and so forth, and the Manomaya Kosha, which is the mind, the mental sheath. Now, this is where I was trying to talk to you about the difference between the buddhi and the manas, if you remember that. It doesn't matter if you know those words. But this is the mental sheath. It's like our ability to have memories and to make projections and to have thoughts. And so it's like how information is stored in our mind, and how we take things in through our senses. And then we have, this is like higher mind now, Vijnana, which means knowledge or wisdom. Vijnana Maya Kosha is our discernment. This is actually more of our intellect. So the Manomaya is that which supports the intellectual functioning. Then the discernment is really our ability to begin to discriminate. It is actually our ability to differentiate, but also it has to do with our ability to see the unity as well. As we move more into the causal body, which is our bliss sheath, the Ananda Maya, which means bliss, kosha. So, Noelle, when you were saying, I don't like coming out of this, right, it's because you were probably somewhere in the causal body. You were in that inner sanctuary, so to speak. And then you can see in the very center is the Atman, the one. So the idea here is that we actually are that unity. We are the Atman. We are the Purusha. We are Shiva. We are the universal. But there are sheaths around that then give us this sense of our own individuality and our own individual expression of self. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I want to do a little meditation on this because we're going to come to our closing pretty soon. So so we still haven't even gotten to the obstructions on the ego. That we'll do next time, and we'll talk a lot about our patterns, our drives, our attachments and addictions, and how all those karmic things take us further and further away from this. So you can see that this is all really big. There's a couple things I wanted to say, though. No, I guess we won't. So again, when we're doing energy healing work, like our Reiki, when we're doing our meditation, we often, you'll often have that feeling of like you don't feel your body. You know you're here, but you don't feel your body, right? It's because that sheath is dissolving or dissipating. So as we go through this meditation, it may feel very similar to what we did with the 7 levels of reality. And it should, right? Because as above, so below. What happens here in this body also happens in the cosmic body. The cosmic body gets cloaked so that we have this individual experience. And then our own individual body gets cloaked or sheathed or covered. Okay? So go ahead and just let your eyes close. And I promise, I'm going to play the bowls, but I promise I'm not going to. That was not intended to be quite that way, so I'm sorry about that one. So go ahead and just let the eyes close. And begin to notice your own awareness. What are you aware of? The sound of the bowls, perhaps? But take your awareness, if you will, into your physical body now. Feel the body, however it's seated, however it's situated. Feel its solidity, its stability. Be aware of how the body seems to support you. You sit upright. Yes, you're supported by the floor or the chair. But the you, the Purusha, the Aham, seems to be supported by the body, the physical body. And yet, one thing we know is God forbid, if something should happen right now and you had a heart attack and you suddenly died, that physical body would collapse. Would the sense of I collapse? Would that Purusha, the soul, be gone? So from physical body, there is a vital energetic structure. The movement, the flow of wind, earth, air. What we call the chakras, the energy centers. Here, it's not sensations registered by the physical body, but perhaps there are some colors, some lights, some sense of inner movement. Perhaps it's this that supports the physical body and not the physical body supporting it. Of going inward, as if the physical body is external, the vital body more internal, the system of the chakras and the nadis, the shushumna that runs up and down the spine, energizing it, holding it upright. The chakras that activate each of the organs. And then there is the knowing. All the knowledge, all the experience that you've accrued, stored. Perception. Where is that located? And yet, is it not by these memories, these projections, that we are defined? Our story, our narration, that which we tell ourselves, our sense of our needs, our wants, our desires. All this that forms our individuality. Going deeper still. Coming to that place within, the beginning of recognition, the discernment. Am I this body? Am I this energy system? Am I these memories, these stories, this narration? Deeper still. What's happened to the I-ness, the self-definition, the physical structure, the energetic structure, the mental structure, the emotional structure? Deeper still. No structure. No body. Simply amness, being, isness. In the very center, is the whole. Sri Ramana Maharshi and many other saints have said that the way to know is to always ask self-inquiry, who am I? And when the cloaks are removed, the sheaths are uncovered, there I am. Tattvamasi. Aham. Om kling klicking around, kling klicking around. I see a few of you who have that look of, I don't want to come back. But my hope is that more and more of what is the true nature, because of this experience, because of this combination of knowledge and experience, that's true wisdom, because of this wisdom that you've gained, whatever you've gained this evening, and each of you have gained, I think quite a bit, but in your own very way. And so as you experience this more and more, then there's a permeation of this into everything that you do, everything that you see, and every action. And yes, we didn't even talk about in yoga there are right actions and there are things that we should practice and all of that. But ultimately, if we get to our true nature, which only means, we have to take off a few cloaks and remove a few sheaths. It's like no big deal because they're really also totally immaterial. That's all we need to do. And then we will do right actions. We will do no harm. We will speak truth. We will act with loving kindness. And yes, we can practice all those things. They're very good things to practice. But it's that allowing ourselves to get to the center and to recognize the center is it's not just a point. The center is that vast ocean that has no sides, no tops, no bottom.